Hey there, welcome to S News. If you want to keep up with stories like this one and never miss a beat, go ahead and follow us. And, it really helps us out if you subscribe, like, and drop a comment below. Thanks for your support, folks. On June 14th, 2025, the USS Princeton was conducting a routine freedom of navigation patrol in the South China Sea when its advanced radar picked up something that nearly triggered World War III.
A Chinese Type 052 Delta destroyer, which had been loitering at 200 kilometers out, suddenly accelerated from 18 to 30 knots in less than 90 seconds.
What the Americans didn't know was that the captain of the Chinese destroyer, Zhongcheng, had just received direct orders from Beijing to intercept the Americans and try to make them blink first.
But Beijing was about to find out why challenging the US Navy in open water is still a very bad idea.
The Nimitz carrier strike group, seen here, was doing what the US Navy has done best for the past 75 years, keeping the world's most critical shipping lanes open, so even Chinese factories can sell their cheap electronics around the world.
They were 180 nautical miles from the nearest Chinese territory, operating in international waters where $3.4 trillion worth of trade flows every year.
Their mission was a textbook freedom of navigation patrol. Predictable course, clear intentions, and the kind of professional behavior that sets real navies apart from floating militias.
At 0926, the target was classified. Radar operators confirmed it was a Chinese Navy Type 052 Delta destroyer, and it was considered a medium to high threat. Inside Princeton's Combat Information Center, the tactical action officer quietly tracked the Chinese destroyer, which was armed with 122 vertical launch cells, enough firepower to turn any ship into fish food. The spy radar, one of the most advanced naval sensors in the world, gave such a detailed picture that you could basically point out every feature on the enemy ship. At its current speed, the Chinese destroyer would enter weapons range in exactly 17 minutes. The math was simple and honestly terrifying for the Chinese. Their YJ-18 anti-ship missiles could cover the remaining distance in under 4 minutes once launched. But Princeton's SM-6 missiles could hit targets 240 nautical miles away and swat them out of the sky like flies. By 0929, the Princeton's captain wanted to know the likely intent of the Chinese ship. The answer was clear. At its current heading and speed, it would be in weapons range in 14 minutes. The tactical recommendation was to go to general quarters, but the captain's response was pure American confidence. Let's see how badly they want to embarrass themselves, if they can even get that far.
The South China Sea was crowded with commercial traffic. 46 merchant vessels within a 50-mile radius. Everything depended on the US Navy to keep those routes safe. A Singaporean container ship full of semiconductors.
A $200 million South Korean LNG tanker.
All of it would be at risk if Beijing succeeded in turning international waters into its private pool. But to do that, China would have to win an actual fight against the US Navy, something that hasn't happened ever.
At 0930, Princeton's cooperative engagement capability automatically shared threat data with every ship in the strike group. The Nimitz, a 104,600-ton floating embassy carrying 90 of the world's most advanced aircraft, adjusted its flight ops with clockwork precision. Destroyers Chenghoon and Kidd moved into position around the carrier, ready to turn any Chinese attack into a one-way trip to the bottom.
At 0935, the tactical picture shifted from concern to danger. An E-2D Hawkeye aircraft flying at 25,000 feet with a 400-mile radar view picked up multiple aircraft launching from China's aircraft carrier, Shandong. The radar signatures matched J-15 fighter jets climbing hard and heading south, like they actually had a shot. Airborne controllers noticed something odd. The J-15s were struggling to gain altitude, likely because their launch system, the ski jump ramp China is so proud of, limits how much fuel and weapons they can carry. A minute later, sonar operators added the final piece of the puzzle, a possible underwater contact 80 nautical miles out. It was emitting noise like a freight train, likely a noisy Type 039 diesel-electric sub. Any competent sub-crew would have been embarrassed.
The Chinese weren't just being aggressive, they were trying to stage a multi-domain intimidation campaign with Cold War-era hardware. Surface ships from the 90s, carrier jets that couldn't carry full loads, subs so loud they might as well broadcast their location on the radio. It was textbook bullying, the kind that only works if your target is weak or too scared to hit back. Unfortunately for Beijing, they were picking a fight with the wrong Navy, in the wrong ocean. The US Navy has been mastering deep-water dominance since 1914. The Chinese were about to get a free lesson in why the American Navy still rules the sea.
By 0937, organized chaos had erupted on the USS Nimitz's flight deck, the kind of chaos only American carriers have mastered. FA-18 Echo Super Hornets from Squadron VFA-14 Top Hatters launched every 45 seconds, catapulting into the sky with balletic precision. This was power projection, something China's inefficient ski jump carriers could only dream of. The first wave of Super Hornets climbed past 15,000 feet. Their AN/APG-79 AESA radars were already tracking incoming J-15s at long range. The tech gap was almost unfair. The American radars could track dozens of targets at once, while the J-15's older, mechanically scanned radars moved side to side like a lighthouse, broadcasting their position. The J-15s climbed hard, burning fuel fast. Without catapults, they had to launch with lighter fuel and weapons loads. Meanwhile, the U.S. jets took off fully loaded with extra fuel tanks and elite pilots. Even more important, every American F-18 was linked via Link 16, sharing real-time sensor data. When one jet sees something, they all see it. In contrast, Chinese pilots relied on voice commands and individual sensors, like fighting as a team while blindfolded.
The technology gap wasn't measured in years, it was measured in decades. Then, the EA-18 Growlers entered the fight without firing a shot. These electronic warfare aircraft carried ALQ-99 jamming pods that could fry enemy electronics from 100 miles away. Once they established their jamming orbits, Chinese comms began to fall apart. On Chinese radar screens, ghost contacts multiplied. US jets flickered in and out of view, doubled and tripled. What looked like 4 F-18s turned into 12, then 20. Radar locks failed and reset over and over. J-15 pilots found themselves fighting ghosts while real threats maneuvered unseen.
The Americans executed a tactical spread called the Wall, a defensive formation refined over decades. High cap at 35,000 feet, mid cap at 25,000, low at 15,000, overlapping engagement zones, mutual support, and no way for the Chinese to approach without entering someone's weapons range. We had the Chinese in a triple-layered trap.
In contrast, the Chinese formation stayed tight because their poor data links meant they had to rely on visual contact to coordinate, making them predictable and vulnerable. Sure, the J-15s might look cool on posters, but in real combat they were flying antiques against a 21st century fight. At 0943, an RC-135 rivet joint aircraft, based on an old Boeing 707, provided critical intelligence. Its Mandarin-speaking linguists were having a field day. They heard Chinese pilots asking for permission to engage. Yes, asking. They were climbing to attack, but first needed approval. For American pilots trained to take the initiative, it was almost funny. By the time Beijing gave the green light, the battlefield had already changed 3 times.
Meanwhile, Princeton's defenses were tracking everything with mechanical precision. Its radar, capable of spotting a baseball from over 165 miles away, made the Chinese destroyer look like a barn door. Firing solutions were constantly updated, and it looked like they might actually be needed.
At 0947, the Chinese destroyer Zhongcheng crossed a line that in any other navy would have triggered an immediate response. Its Type 346A radar stopped scanning and locked onto the USS Nimitz with fire control quality tracking, basically the naval version of pointing a loaded gun at someone.
Inside Princeton's command center, the U.S. response was instant, but deliberate. Countless drills kicked in. The Chinese were gambling that the Americans would stay restrained. What they were about to learn is that restraint doesn't mean weakness.
Princeton's fire control radars were on standby. Its 122 vertical launch cells held enough firepower to send the Zhongcheng to the bottom in seconds. SM-6s with a 240-kilometer range. SM-2s for closer threats, all aimed and ready.
The Chinese destroyer was now exposed, from multiple angles to multiple systems, with zero chance of surviving if things escalated. The whole thing lasted just 30 seconds, just long enough for the Chinese to claim they could have attacked, but not long enough to justify a US self-defense response. It was a calculated act of aggression, but aimed at the wrong opponent. The crew aboard the USS Princeton recorded everything: timestamps, signal characteristics, and carrier data. Information that would have been incredibly valuable if this had turned into a real shooting war. But even though the Chinese ship shut off its radar lock, things weren't over yet. Up in the air, a J-15 pilot decided to get reckless. He broke formation and dove toward an F-18 in what's known among fighter pilots as a hard break, a close, aggressive pass meant to intimidate.
But the American pilot, trained at Top Gun, wasn't fazed. He simply rolled over and got behind the Chinese jet at the 6 o'clock position. For 3 solid seconds, the American had a perfect firing solution. His helmet-mounted display showed the Chinese engines glowing hot in infrared. One squeeze of the trigger, and an AIM-9X Sidewinder would have shot straight into the J-15's exhaust. But he didn't fire. Professional discipline held firm. The moment passed.
But China wasn't done just yet.
Things escalated again when the Chinese sub made its move. A Type 039 diesel-electric submarine crept closer, using a thermal layer to mask its approach. At 0951, it made a big mistake. It raised its snorkel to recharge its batteries. Contact sonar reading, depth 159 feet, range 15,000 yards, classified as a likely Type 039. Still noisy as ever, like a freight train underwater.
What the sub-captain didn't know, or didn't care about, was that Princeton's SQ-89 sonar system had been tracking him for over an hour. The ship had a full acoustic signature catalogue and could pinpoint the sub's position within meters. If things had turned kinetic, the sub would have had maybe 12 seconds to think before an ASROC rocket turned it into fish food. The tactical picture was a textbook case of how not to run naval operations. The Chinese forces had boxed themselves in: carrier to the northwest, destroyer to the west, submarine to the southwest. If fighting had broken out, none of them would have survived the first 5 minutes. And the Americans were about to demonstrate exactly how that would have played out.
At 14:30, the USS Nimitz launched everything it had that could fly. 48 aircraft took off in one of the biggest single-carrier flight ops in years. Super Hornets loaded with live weapons, EA-18G Growlers with powerful electronic warfare systems, E-2D Hawkeyes taking control of the airspace. The afternoon sky darkened with American aircraft. The Growlers went to work first. Their ALQ-99 jamming pods lit up, and Chinese radar screens turned into abstract art. Hundreds of fake signals appeared. Real aircraft disappeared into the electronic noise. The air defense screen aboard Shandong looked like someone spilled paint on it. Chinese radar operators couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. Everything looked like a threat.
And then came the Submarine, a Virginia-class attack sub that had been silently shadowing the Chinese formation for 8 days, quiet, invisible, patient. At 15:47, it surfaced 6 nautical miles from the Shandong, close enough for Chinese lookouts to see the black hull with their own eyes. The psychological impact was devastating. 8 days of undetected operations. Their entire anti-subsystem, screens, helicopters, sonar buoys and hull-mounted sonar, had failed to spot a 7,900-ton American sub. If this had been a real war, their carrier would already be a burning wreck. The sub's captain had ordered the emergency surface just for dramatic effect. It burst out of the water like a breaching whale, water pouring off its hull in the afternoon sun. Chinese shipboard photographers captured a perfect image of American dominance. After about 90 seconds, just long enough to be seen, photographed and reported, the sub slipped quietly back beneath the waves. The message was clear: we control the sea.
By 1623, the Chinese carrier strike group began retreating. Official Chinese statements later said they had completed their scheduled exercises. But everyone knew the truth. They came to project power, to intimidate ships that were simply exercising lawful navigation, and to stake a claim over waters that don't belong to them.
Finally, at the end of the video, we just want to thank you for listening and encourage you to follow S News and watch future videos. Don't forget to subscribe, like,